Good morning, everyone. So we're standing in front of the round church behind us because we're going to do a Cambridge heritage tour today.
Yeah, it'll be about 2 hours or so, and hopefully we'll cover some of the more historical sites here in Cambridge.
Yeah, so we're running a bit late. Let's just hop right in.
Yeah.
Christian abolishing the slave trade when we go outside St. John's. And we'll also have to. You'll notice this church is called St. Clement. So it's now rented out, and the Orthodox have done a lovely job of the fact that it's called St. Clement sign here, when I from America, they say quayside, and even though we're 40 miles from the sea, this was navigable until the 17th century, which is why Cambridge, the coat of arms and the shield of Cambridge has on it 3 sailing ships. You know, you think, for goodness sake, we're that a long way from the sea. But it was an inland port, which helps to explain why it was a relatively important town. And every year it would have the Stourbridge Fair in the autumn, about a mile down from here. And that was a European trade fair of quite some significance. King John had given the rights to the fair in 1215. And so Cambridge was quite an important place. It's the breadbasket of England. It was in the Middle Ages about 6,000 or 7,000 people, which is sort of, you know, when you told the Chinese that, they go, oh, yeah. We had cities of 500,000 in the Middle Ages. It has some monasteries here, and it was sufficiently important for a whole bunch of students in 1209 to come running with their masters to get the foundation of the university. And they ran from Oxford because there had been a big brawl in Oxford. Some students had been playing with their bows and arrows. They'd by mistake killed a townswoman. They had been strung up and hung. That had caused a fight between town and gown, which the gown had lost. And in those days, because you didn't own buildings, you just rented buildings, you picked up your stuff and you came to Cambridge. Because the masters, many of the people, the masters, actually had significant contacts with people in Cambridge. And also because there were some monasteries here prepared to put the students up. So
So pretty.
through this railing, you can see up on the chapel there, a bit high up, and you can see he's holding in his chains, and his name is Thomas Clarkson. And so we're now moving from the foundation of the university, back in the 13th century, and the foundation of Magdalene in the 16th, and now we're having to move up to the 18th century and look at the whole issue of the slave trade. And it's enormously rich because of this appalling man, Henry VIII, up there. I was jokingly having a conversation like this, and there was a porter just there, and I said, if we're scared to knock on anyone's sector door, well, Henry VIII murdered 2 of his wives, and why not knock his? He was really, you don't say that on Trinity College.
Oh, are you serious?
Yes, I was actually. I think he did this and gave us a ton of money. But it's a slightly odd story because Henry, despite the fact that he had dissolved the monasteries to make himself head of the church so that he could get the divorce he wanted, you know, he's a DIY guy, if the Pope won't give it to me, I'll give it to myself. So despite that, he was running out of money because there was inflation in the 16th century caused by the influx of silver and gold from the New World, and people hadn't understood what it did to prices. The other problem was that, and there was people clipping coinage and all that sort of stuff, and the other problem was that Henry was fighting the French, as was the custom in the Middle Ages to any time more or less to fight the French. You know, the weather is nicer, the wine is better, etc. And you want your great nobles out of the country causing trouble there, not causing trouble here. And the other thing was, of course, that you claimed, for complicated reasons, to be King of France, which is why the field has got the fleur de lion, as well as the lands of England. So Henry was thinking at one stage of taking lands from Oxford and Cambridge, and it's thanks to later on Archbishop Parker, who had connections with Corpus Christi, who apparently did a survey of all the colleges to see if it was worth it. And he did a very creative accounting, sir. It's just simply not worth it. Saved the colleges. Plus the fact, Catherine Parr said you'll have no officials to run the country because this is where you get your sort of, you know, your literate and numerate class of bureaucrats. And she persuaded him, you're a very great king, so the story goes, such a great king, why don't you build the biggest and best college or not? So Henry actually was responsible for taking this, and he actually took another little college from Michael House and he banged them all together and called it Trinity Hall, because as you can see, he didn't found the college. If you look underneath, Eduardius Tertius founder, Edward III founded it back in 1337, is it? And what he did was take King's Hall and then with another college banged together and called it Trinity. And he was the guy who gave it the money. So that's why it became important. Now we'll just look at a little bit at the scientific revolution. You see, about 2 years ago, there was a big article in the Times. Cambridge University Press had taken 300 articles out of Time, which was a Chinese magazine as a result of the Chinese government putting pressure on them. These articles were critical of the Chinese government. This is supposed to be the outreach of reaching up to God. It's based on the whole style produced by Abbot Suge just outside of Paris. The wonderful church just outside of Paris. It's kind of gave us the vocabulary for this style, with the big windows letting in God's light and all of that. And so you go into a nave of the church, the great long nave, and that's named after our Latin word navis, meaning a ship. So what you're doing is you're going into the ship of salvation, the ark, essentially, of salvation. So the language of the church in some senses is speaking, telling you about the faith. That's where you got your degree until the 18th century. After the 18th century, you get your degree in this Greek temple. And what you're seeing is a shift from a more religious, shift in worldview, from a more religious age to a more secular. The reason for that is in the 17th century, we've got terrible religious wars, we've got witch burnings, quite a bit around here. And as a result of that, people say, we don't want theology, we want philosophy. And if you're going to have philosophy, you're then going to look at the more humanist tradition of Greek and Rome, that's why you have a Greek temple, and you're going to follow the tradition of Plato and Aristotle, and so you're going to read John Locke, you're going to read Thomas Hobbes, you're going to read Voltaire, etc., etc. So that's what happens. Okay. Interestingly, at the end of the 18th century, there's something called the French Revolution, which, because in the 18th century it's called the Age of Reason, it's called the Enlightenment, because we are putting behind the medieval world. In fact, the word Gothic is a put down about the medieval world. The Gothic is old and barbarous and superstitious, etc., etc. And that's what the Middle Ages are like. The Enlightenment is different. We're now enlightened, you see. But they had the French Revolution, this Enlightenment project. France drowned in blood. People said, what's happened to sweet reason? And there was a kind of reaction against it, slightly more complicated reason. So why you get St. John's Chapel, by Gilbert Scott, I think it is, in the neo-Gothic style, is because people are saying we better go back to Christianity, because it's safer. I'm simplifying a little bit, but more or less. Then, as some of you know, if you're a naughty boy or an age of equal opportunity, a naughty girl, you can jump from the building on the right to the building on the left. The Night Climbing Society is still in operation. You can see the spikes up there on King's College, so you can climb up there. Can you ever remember seeing Peace in Vietnam up there back in the 70s? Yeah. And I began to ask her, wondered if this, night climbing, because there's no mountains around here. You see what they got paid for, the amount of day they got. But that was what. of man, say no more, and but nonetheless gave a ton of money to his old college Corpus, and had this clock made, which is a mechanical clock. And this clock has a message. On the top is a locust, which in the Bible, of course, is a symbol of wasted time. So he's saying basically, don't waste your time. And underneath, there's a verse, I think it is from the Epistle of John, which says, the world passes and the desire thereof, which is a polite way of saying you're going to get old. All right, if you're going to get old, don't waste your time. Interestingly, there's a second half to that verse, which they didn't have room for, didn't believe. Because it says, the second half of the verse says, and those who believe in God will live forever. But that bit's been left out. Ironically, because he said rude things about the Patagonian natives in his journals. The hero is sort of a few years, and then now you're being down. Quite what his view on faith is hard. You know, he had The Origin of Species in 1859, The Descent of Man in 1871. What really seems to actually hurt his faith more than anything was his wife was a Wedgwood, and Emma was a very pious Christian. What hurt his faith was his 10-year-old favourite daughter died, and he just found that very difficult. So quite where he lay. But interestingly, in the 19th century, there were important Christians who agreed with him, like in, I'm trying to remember the name of the great chap in Harvard, and there were important scientists who disagreed with him, like Louis Agassiz, who was a great scientist in the United States and said, no, he's got it all wrong. And in fact, Darwin's theories don't make sense until you can explain the passing on of genetic changes, which is what the monk, Mendel, is anyone people familiar with him? He's the person who's responsible for that. And his, so in a sense, neo-Darwinism is a sort of mixture of Mendel and Darwin. And of course, as you know, it's a very controversial subject amongst Christians, and it's controversial partly because Christians disagree. There's the young earth creationists, the old earth creationists, the intelligent design people, and the theistic evolutionists. I think many of you probably know some of the, I know some of the things who are purely scientists and those who know some of the problems, including their faith, including evolution.